We begin today with end-of-life choice. Almost 3 years since they came into effect, New Zealand's assisted dying laws are being reviewed, and advocates are pushing to expand eligibility so that patients in the future wouldn't require a 6-month prognosis to qualify for an assisted death. As of late this week, a total of 964 people have died by legally sanctioned euthanasia in New Zealand. So that's about one New Zealander every day. After years of campaigning, 2/3 of New Zealand voters voted in support of the End-of-Life Choice Act in the 2020 referendum. And in November 2021, the law came into effect.
That gives them comfort, just knowing that that choice is there, even though they might not take it.
Te Whatu Ora publishes annual reports on assisted dying in New Zealand. In the first 5 months with the new law, there were more than 200 applications and a total of 66 assisted deaths in New Zealand. In the year that followed, there were 807 applications and 328 deaths. And in the most recent year to April, the numbers increased. 834 applications with 344 deaths. The demographic breakdown records stark differences between different groups. So last year, 82% of those who died by assisted death were Pākehā, just 4% were Māori, 2% were Asian, and Pacific peoples made up less than 0.5%. When the End-of-Life Choice Act was passed, it included a statutory provision to review it within 3 years. But the terms of reference for the review did not include eligibility for assisted dying. So now, at the same time as the review is underway, ACT MP Todd Stevenson has introduced a members' bill that would tackle the eligibility issue and remove the requirement that a terminally ill patient has less than 6 months to live in order to be eligible for an assisted death. Kia ora, Todd, good morning.
Good morning, Jack.
Let's just start off with the review as it stands. What have we learnt from New Zealand's experience of these laws?
Yes, so at the moment, as you correctly said, there is a review underway, which actually is going to look at two things: how the law currently as it is working, kind of mechanistically, etc. There is actually also an opportunity for people to raise issues as they see them. So there's kind of an open-ended part, and that the review applications or the comments actually will close this Thursday, so there's still time for people to put in submissions. And so, yeah, that material will be ready for us to look at in November.
And in terms of the mechanisms of the law, how's it working?
Very well, I think. I mean, we've got a very safe law here in New Zealand. It's highly reported on. There's obviously a number of steps people need to go through, and there's a lot of information available about the people who are making applications, how they're being assessed, and then their outcomes. So I think it's a very, very safe and effective law.
Outside of eligibility, which we will get to, what do you see as being the biggest problem with the law as it stands?
Well, I think mechanistically there are some issues around how long it might be taking people to be assessed. So I think that's come up in some of the reports over the last few years. And I think there are some other issues people have raised about the role of healthcare professionals. Obviously at the moment they're not allowed to proactively talk about end-of-life choice or assisted dying. So that again is an issue I've heard people raise.
That's the so-called gag clause, and I'll ask you about that in a moment. But let's talk about the timeframes here. So more than 250 people had been assessed by the medical practitioners, according to the latest annual numbers, but died while waiting for an assisted death. And there was an average of about 16 days between a formal application being made and approval. Is 16 days too long?
Well, that's what obviously I think this review will look at. Yes, and again, it's going to very much depend on individual circumstances. I mean, what we're obviously trying to do here is relieve the pain and suffering of people who are living with a terminal illness. And in some circumstances, 16 days might be too long. And so I think that's something hopefully a review can look into.
So what's your position there? Do you think that if the average is 16 days, that suggests the process is taking too long?
Well, I think, that, again, obviously if that is the average, it's going to be upper and lower ends of that. And again, because it is such a safe and rigorous process, you've got to have a first assessment by your kind of primary healthcare professional and then a second independent assessment, and then there's another conversation. So, you know, there is quite a lot to the process.
And so just to be clear though, is your position that if 16 days is the average, is your sense that is too long for the average?
Well, again, I think we need to look at the kinds of people that are accessing assisted dying, because in some people's specific circumstances it might be too long. So again, I've got an open mind, Jack. Let's look at the data.
You don't have a position as it stands. So 50 people who qualified for an assisted death last year and had been assessed by medical practitioners were then unable to proceed to an assisted death because they were deemed to have lost competency.
would you support changes on the competency checks?
No, I want to keep the regime basically as it is. Again, you know, there are a lot of checks and balances, and so being competent is one of the main criteria, and I think that needs to remain.
As the law stands, doctors are not allowed to raise the prospect of an assisted death as an option for terminally ill patients. Is the so-called gag clause appropriate?
Look, I've got an open mind on that. It's certainly not something my bill is aiming to address, but people have raised that issue. And in fact, I was in a meeting last week when that was raised, and I think it's something that needs to be looked at. Again, we've also, though, got to balance the concerns that when the bill was passed at the time around coercion and making sure people are completely informed of all of their options. One of the other things I do like about our bill is that actually as part of the discussions, healthcare professionals do have to talk about all of their end-of-life choice options. So they are actually prevented a lot of information as they go through this process.
But you don't have a position on the gag clause?
Not at this stage. I do want to talk to people who have raised that. And again, it's usually members of the medical community. And so, yeah, I want to talk to them a bit more.
Yeah, I mean, if you're in a position to put forward a members' bill and you think, you have strong enough thoughts on the prospect of an assisted death, shouldn't you have a position on something like the gag clause?
No, well, let me talk about how my members' bill came
I will ask
because
about
I think that's
yeah.
important. But look, as I said, I have an open mind. We're going to obviously have the review, which will wind up in November. There'll be opportunity for people to raise other issues. And as I said, happy to talk to people about what they've raised. And as I said, we may be able to make further adjustments.
Don't worry, I will ask about the members' bill. So there is an ongoing investigation at the moment into a complaint that someone was possibly subjected to family coercion. We checked, that complaint hasn't been fully processed yet by the authorities. But if that complaint is upheld, what responsibility do you think the state bears in facilitating the death of someone who might have been pressured into it?
Look, I think we need to obviously understand what the exact complaint was. But look, I think I'd come back to the point, the fact that we actually have this really rigorous regime and all of these safety measures in place means we know something about that, and the fact that people can actually bring forward their concerns and they're looked into. Look, I think this is a very sensitive area because we are actually allowing the state to assist someone with a terminal illness who is going to die to have an assisted death. So I think there is a lot of responsibility here.
By the nature of assisted dying, though, would you accept that there is no way for us to wholly know if people who have died by an assisted death might have been feeling a sense of coercion or pressure at the time?
Look, we can never know completely, but again, I'll go back, Jack. This is a very rigorous process. There's a first assessment, an independent assessment, and then a further discussion. So, I think all of the steps are in place, and I think what the data you actually have talked about shows that, there isn't big issues in this area.
Why do you think so few patients are being referred to a psychiatrist?
Again, that's on the advice of those medical professionals making that assessment. They decide whether a psychiatrist is needed. And obviously, in most cases, that's not required. But again, we do see people being referred, and again, that's part of the safety mechanisms in this legislation.
Let's talk about your members' bill. What does it change?
Well, look, I'd been approached by people in the community, and again, I accepted a petition from
a group of people.
From a group of people, signed by over 3,300 New Zealanders, and that related to a particular case of a New Zealander who couldn't access assisted dying because she could not meet the 6-month eligibility criteria. So, at the moment there's 5 criteria, Jack, you've got to meet. You've got to be over 18 years of age and a New Zealand citizen and resident. You must be able to demonstrate that you're likely to die of a terminal illness within 6 months. You must be in a state of irreversible physical decline. Your pain cannot be controlled in a manner that you find tolerable, and obviously you must have mental capability to make a decision. And so it really, that's a lot of criteria, but it's this 6 months, being able to prove that within 6 months that you're likely to die of your illness that's causing some problems.
If your members' bill was to become law, we would lose the 6-month provision, which would mean that anyone who was experiencing a terminal illness and met those other criteria would qualify for an assisted death.
That's correct.
So what is a terminal illness?
Well, it's obviously a serious illness where you are, as I said, going through a state of physical decline, which is irreversible.
I mean, like diabetes is a terminal illness.
No, but that can be treated. And I think that's when these other criteria, like having a treatment that is acceptable or you can tolerate is available.
But acceptable and tolerating is always in the eye of the beholder, right?
Yes, but that's why medical professionals make these assessments independently.
You know, when this Act was first passed, critics said that essentially it would be subject to a slippery slope, that by allowing any form of state-sanctioned assisted death would be opening up the doors to changes to eligibility in the future. And that seems to be exactly the case.
I don't accept that, Jack, actually. What we've put in place is a very safe law. And what we're trying to do here, Jack, is actually respect people's dignity in dying, give people who have made this choice with a serious illness the opportunity to decide the time and place of their death, be surrounded by loved ones. I mean, we're actually, if you look at the statistics, 80% of people choose to actually die in a private residence, often surrounded by loved ones, and that's been reported. And so this is really a very humane law that actually, for people with a serious terminal illness can have the option to choose.
If we were to lose that 6-month provision, though, I'm to think about it from the perspective of medical technology, and you've worked for pharmaceutical companies. So what's to say that a pharmaceutical company might not introduce a new drug that radically changes someone's prognosis in a period that's a bit longer than 6 months, so say 12 months' time?
The choice is coming back to the individual. If they want to decide that something might come up in the future, that's a decision for them to make. As I said, this is a person's individual decision to make about whether they want to access assisted dying and then work through the criteria. And I think that's the right way to go.
It seems to me that one of the big complexities potentially comes around Alzheimer's and dementia. So according to the WHO, Alzheimer and associated dementias are the world's 7th leading cause of death, higher than diabetes. Currently, dementia is the second most common cause of death in Australia for people over the age of 65. So would your amendment allow people with dementia to access an assisted death?
No, not straight away, or not at all, in fact, unless they continue to meet the criteria. So, we talked about the 5 criteria. So mental competency is a key element of the bill, or of the law as we have it, and so that would remain. Look, there could be people, Jack, even today, that are in the early stages of Alzheimer's. But again, the issue is it an illness that is going to end your life? And that's, again, medical professionals would have to decide that.
But I mean, this is the thing. Dementia does end people's life. Alzheimer's does end people's life. And if we were to allow your amendment, and someone was to be experiencing dementia and had intolerable suffering and was rapidly declining, then theoretically they would meet those criteria, except that it might take longer than 6 months.
No, they wouldn't meet the criteria because they wouldn't be mentally competent to make a decision to apply for assisted dying.
But if you think about the philosophy behind giving individuals choice about the way they die, wouldn't there be many people who actually said, you know what, I don't want to get to a point where I lose competency, where I lose my faculties, where potentially I have to be in a home of sorts? Won't there be people in that position who say, I want to access an assisted death?
Absolutely understand there will be people like that, but that's not the amendment I'm putting forward, and that's not how our current law operates, or would even operate after my amendment. There is another issue that's kind of parallel to this, and it's around advanced care directives. But again, that's not something we're looking at in this change that I'm proposing.
So in principle, though, in the future, would you support a framework whereby someone can make an advance request?
I wouldn't at this stage. I want to, as I say, make this small extension to our law. Continue to use the frame that we have, where again you do actually have to prove mental competency at the time you're making the decision. So no.
Because other countries that have introduced assisted dying laws have gone down that path, and again this comes back to the slippery slope argument that critics of the Act currently make. They say that by allowing what we've allowed in New Zealand so far, inevitably we're going to get to a point where people who do have conditions such as dementia say, actually, I want to be able to make an advance request to access an assisted death in the future when I no longer have competency. So what assurances can you give people who make that argument that isn't the future that awaits New Zealand? Well,
the assurance I can make is what I'm looking at is keeping the framework of the legislation that we have in place today, making at this stage just one small amendment around the 6-month criteria, but again, keeping all the other safeguards, which, as I said, include mental competency. You can't, have a mental illness or condition or be disabled, or just of advanced ageing. So they're all things that exclude you.
Is your government doing enough to support palliative care?
Look, I think that's a completely separate issue, which I'm again happy to discuss it at the right
Is it
time.
a separate issue?
Yes, it is, because that's a funding issue, isn't it, Jack?
Well, yeah, it is. But it's palliative care, which surely end-of-life choice makes up a consideration in palliative care for some people.
Well, end-of-life choice is where people are making a decision about whether they want to enter palliative care or access assisted dying.
Some people who are in palliative care want to access assisted dying.
Absolutely, and again, that would be great if that was more readily available, and I hope that hospices across New Zealand maybe change some of their policies so that people aren't having to move in and out of facilities. But look, I have heard that people want us to focus more on ensuring that we are properly funding palliative care. And again, I met with the Hospice Society in Nelson just recently, and again, I'm taking that back to my ministerial colleagues.
So what would be your assessment of it as the moment, as your party's health spokesperson? Is it appropriately funded at the moment?
Well, my assessment is that the past Labor government's mess with Health New Zealand is causing some of the issues. So again, this is the area where we need to look at how these services are being contracted. Are they being, appropriately remunerated? Has there been any adjustments to the way they're, financed or support that's given? So I think, as I said, that's a separate issue, but I am speaking with my colleagues about it.
Do you think you would have a majority if this goes to a conscience vote?
Look, I've got to now work across the Parliament, speaking to my parliamentary colleagues, actually finding out their views on the amendment I've put up, and work to convince them this is the right thing to do, and I'm up to do that.
Thanks very much for your time. We appreciate it. Todd Stevenson.